So let's take a look at some of the brush controls as well as subdividing and dynameshing and what their differences are. So first of all, let's take out the lazy mouse. So hit the L key, Control or Command and Z, and now let's activate the symmetry. So hit the X key to activate symmetry, and now we can see that there are two of these dots on the surface of the mesh. So that means that we are sculpting symmetrically now. And let's divide the cube once again. I'm going to show you what the purpose of this subdivide smooth modifier is. So let's deactivate that one and divide it to the 5th subdivision level. So there we have it. But did anything happen to the mesh? It's still looking very polygonal. Well, it was divided, of course. The smooth modifier works so that that every time we are dividing the mesh with the smooth modifier on, it is actually, well, smoothing the mesh. So if we deactivate the smooth modifier, it's going to add subdivisions, but without affecting the forms. So just so you know that there is also this kind of a feature there. It might be very handy in certain cases, but especially when we are sculpting something very organic, this might not exactly be what we would go for. Anyway, so I'll activate that just in case we're going to be using the subdivisions or the divide feature again. But right now I think that we could go on from here, and let's familiarize ourselves with the draw size and focal shift and the Z intensity. So first of all, when we sculpt here, we can see that this is the draw size now, the current draw size, and we can affect it by sliding this, using this slider here. So obviously the bigger the brush radius is, the bigger the outcome is going to be. And we can access this slider also from the S key, so like so. In addition to that, we also have the focal shift there, and we can access that slider with the O key. So focal shift affects into this fall off radius. So let's like that. And then there is the Z intensity in here, and that we can access with the hotkey U. And what that does is, well, let's take a closer look. So we have the Z intensity of 8 now, so it's not going to be very intense, as we see. So let's bump that up a bit and see what happens. Very strong intensity. And so what does that Z mean in there? Well, it means depth, the intensity of the depth of the brush that we have in use. So just like X and Y denote to the horizontal and vertical directions, Z is the depth, and that is also why ZBrush is called ZBrush. So because we are affecting the depth, we are affecting the third dimension. Anyway, so we can also access these sliders by pressing down the button on your stylus. So let's click on the button on your stylus, and here we can see all of these sliders, plus some other familiar icons here, and we can even access the brushes from here. Another way to access the brush menu is to just quite simply hit the B key. So all of these menus have their or features have their, or let's say many of the features have their separate hotkeys, but also the button on your stylus is also a way to access many of these features. And then let's pick the move brush, and I'll bump the draw size a bit, and I now decide that I'm going to want to sculpt this weird cube into a head. So let's see how that goes. So I'm using the move brush now, and I'm using it with the combination of the Alt key. So what that does is that if we would be using the move brush without the Alt key, so let's pick a point there and start drawing. So the selected area is just going to be pulled to the direction of the cursor, and in some cases this might be exactly what we need, but with the Alt key down and then affecting an area, we can actually pull or push the vertices to their normal directions. And this is very, very handy because it enables us to shape this mesh without having to actually rotate it every time that we are trying to move those areas to certain directions. So now I'm not using the or pressing down the Alt key, and if I would want to, oh, by the way, I'm using the Shift key to smooth the mesh. So Shift, when you press the Shift key down, the cursor turns blue, which means that it's changed to the smooth brush, and that way we can smooth the details. Anyway, as I was explaining, so if we were to use this move brush without the Alt key, it would mean that we would always have to move or reorient the object to pull the forms to certain direction. But with the Alt key pressed down, we can, without reorienting the object, we can just pull the forms in their respective normal direction. And this is going to make it a whole lot faster for us to sculpt or shape the primary forms of whatever we are working on. Right now it's apparently going to be a face. Anyway, there's also another thing regarding this sculpting of this face. It's because we are on the 5th subdivision level, and it has a total of 126 978 vertices altogether. So that's a quite dense mesh. So it's not as easy, or it's not so responsive. The mesh is not so responsive as it would be if there were less vertices, less geometry. So let's take the subdivision levels down. Okay, so that's looking already pretty good. Let's delete the higher subdivision levels, we don't need them. And then let's activate the smooth brush by pressing down Shift, and as you can see, since the geometry is not as dense as before, we are able to smooth the mesh effortlessly. So now we can shape the head. And it's always a good idea, whatever you are sculpting, start off with low poly counts, because it's going to save you a lot of time. You don't have to go about, smoothing and smoothing and smoothing some details and areas or anything like that. You just sculpt. Okay, then we come to a point where we would actually appreciate a little more detail. So I'll just make the eye sockets there. So I'm using the move brush again together with the Alt key, pulling the vertices to their normal directions. Like so. Bumping up the draw size a bit. Pulling out the vertices again. The jawline might be slightly lower. So now we are gradually getting to the point where we are quite happy with the overall silhouette. We can see the silhouette in there. We can also, if we want to, pick some suitable matte cap, like for example this, or just quite simply hit the V key. Except that now we would also need the background color changed. Well, anyway, so that's a good point there anyway. So if you have your mesh black, completely black, and you don't know what has happened, it is because you have pressed down the V key, which is changing the color Anyway, so let's continue with the sculpting. But that's just so you know, if you have had if you have a problem with the mesh suddenly turning black, it's because you have changed its color. So click the V key. Anyway, so more geometry would be very nice to get some detail in there. So I guess it's time to go dividing again. So let's hit the divide so that we get to the 5th subdivision level, maybe even the 6th. And then let's take the damn standard brush from there, and now we are going to have a problem, because as you can see, there are a lot of stretched polygons around in here. So it's going to affect what anything will look like that we're sculpting. So over here, the mesh is very even. The polygons are evenly distributed, so it's not going to cause much problems here. But over here, that's looking nasty. We don't want something like that. And it happens because it's still the same geometry that the cube had. So what are we gonna do about it? Well, there is this option, or not just an option, not just any kind of option. This is one of the best features in this program, or at least one of the most utilized. Dynamesh. So here in the Geometry tab, Dynamesh. And let's see how it works. So first of all, let's bump the resolution up to like something like that, and then Dynamesh it. And nope. So what happened there is that Dynamesh created a completely new geometry for the mesh. So let's take a step back, Command and Z, and we can see that the previous geometry that we had was like this. There were lots of stretchy polygons in there, and then the Dynameshed geometry is even. But it's also maybe a bit too dense. ZBrush is even struggling with moving this mesh about. It's not supremely bad performance or anything, but there's just quite simply there's more geometry that we would actually need at this point. So as I said before, always start from low poly count, and then when you actually need the geometry, then you can bump the geometry up and either Dynamesh the mesh on a higher level, or subdivide the mesh to higher subdivision levels, and so on. But right now we would be very well off with a lot lower resolution mesh. So let's Dynamesh it again. This time I slid the resolution slider slightly lower. Let's see what happens, and I'm I'm quite liking this mesh. It's looking very responsive. So let's try it. Let's see what it looks like. I'm going to bump the intensity of this clay brush a bit. This is also a very good brush for sculpting. So I like this. This is a good mesh for now. So let's just add shapes there. And well, I'm not going to go about sculpting this into a finished bust or anything like that, but I'm just showing you just a little bit of the process here. So I'm using the move brush now together with the Alt key that I so enthusiastically advertised for you. And then one thing to know about Dynameshing is that there is this blur slider in here, currently at 2. So if we bump this up and then re-dynamesh this, it's going to be, well, blurred. So let's take a step back. Oh, and it already did it automatically. I didn't even notice it. So we had this Dynamesh active. So now let's bump it up and hit the Dynamesh. So it's blurring it. So that's also good to know. So if your Dynamesh is for some reason producing very blurry or a smoothed mesh, it's quite simply because you have either accidentally or maybe you don't remember it, but anyway, the reason is because of this blur slider. So then one more thing about this is that we are currently sculpting this head in orthographic view, and we can shift to the perspective view by clicking on this button here. So as you can see, we're getting actually a sense of depth into the piece. So let's go to this cube primitive here, and let's pick this move transform tool, very similar to what traditional modeling applications also have. So let's make this into longer, and then we can see that there is a perspective. So this edge is almost double the length, or approximately double the length of this side or edge. And if we deactivate the perspective, it is in orthographic view, and this edge here is exactly the same length as this edge. So especially like when you are sculpting faces or something like that, it's extremely important to activate this perspective view, because otherwise your character is going to look a bit strange when brought into an actual real-time engine. So perspective there. And that's for it. Next we'll move on to how to have more of these 3D objects in the same project, in the same tool.